Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe Giorgio, Hanover Township Business Administrator, Township Clerk. I will be serving as the moderator for this afternoon's meeting. I just want to say for the record, this is the first time that we're using this teleconferencing service. We don't intend to make this the policy and the practice. This is only being used temporarily while we go through this unfortunate COVID-19 state of emergency. Once that state of emergency is lifted, we will go back to our regular meetings with everyone present in the main meeting room. I want to publicly thank everyone in advance for their patience and understanding and for taking the time to participate when the regular meeting is open to the public at certain times. Just for the record, the Township published legal ads in the Monday, April 6, 2020 issues of the Daily Record and the Star Ledger, and in the Thursday, April 9th issue of the Hanover Eagle. The legal ad was also placed on the Township's website. In each of those publications, the Township published a dial-in number, which you've used, 978-990-5000, and an access code of 266554 for members of the public to participate in or listen to the regular public meeting, which is being recorded. During this regular public meeting, which is now commencing, the public lines will be placed on mute so that everyone can listen to the discussion of the governing body. When the public hearing on the 2020 budget takes place, and when the public hearings on ordinance numbers 12 and 13 occur, the public line will again be open for public comment. In similar fashion, at the conclusion of the formal business portion of the meeting, the teleconference line will be open again in order for the public to ask a question, make a comment. At that time, speakers will only be given one opportunity to speak and not for more than 4 minutes in length. This rule will be strictly followed. In order to conduct the meeting in orderly fashion, I think it is important that we establish a few ground rules to make sure members of the public can be heard, as well as members of the public being able to hear the discussion of the Township Committee and other members of the public. So, as moderator of the meeting, when portions are open, I'd like to proceed in alphabetical order as follows. I will ask for members of the public whose last names begin with A to G to announce themselves for recognition. I will then proceed in groups, that is H to N and then O to Z. When the meeting line is open to the public, please mute your phone if you are not speaking so everyone else may hear the meeting. Background noise such as televisions, movement of papers, eating will be heard unless you place your phone on mute. So we need your assistance in that respect. If a member of the public wishes to address the governing body during the public hearings or at the end of the meeting, they must state their full name and address for the record each time they speak. Make their statement, ask a question, or make a comment, and then conclude that they are finished. The governing body will respond at the conclusion of all public comments so that all those participating telephonically can hear all responses of the Township Committee. All members of the public are asked to conduct themselves in a respectful and professional manner when addressing the governing body. The Township will not tolerate anyone who makes inappropriate statements or disrupts the meeting, and in this regard, the township may take appropriate action to ensure all members of the public may hear and participate in the meeting. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to ask Mayor Francioli at this time to read into the record the Open Public Meetings Act statement.
As follows. Adequate notice of the April the 9th, 2020 meeting has been provided in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by posting written notice and agenda of the meeting on the bulletin board in the municipal building, 1000 Route 10, Township of Hanover, and by hand delivering, mailing, or faxing such notice and agenda to the following newspapers: Morris County's Daily Record, the Star Ledger, Hanover Eagle, and by filing same with the Township Clerk. Moderator on the roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. On roll call, Committeeman Gallagher.
Here.
Committeeman Faramasca.
Here.
Committeeman Mahalko.
Here.
Committeeman Cahill.
Here.
And Mayor Francioli.
Here.
5 members in attendance, sir. At this time, I would ask everyone to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing so that Deputy Mayor Faramasca may lead the prayer.
Almighty God, we ask that you bless this governing body with an abundance of wisdom and understanding, so that every deliberation will result in action which will promote the common good and the general welfare for all of the people of Hanover Township. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Faramasca. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to proceed with the formal agenda. So the first item of business is the approval of the Township Committee regular minutes of March the 12th, 2020. So
all participants are muted.
May we have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
Motion to approve.
May I have a motion? Do we have a second? Who made that motion? Was that Ron?
That was Mayor Ron. Yep.
Okay, Mayor Ron made the motion. And the second?
Ace Gallagher made the second.
Okay, thank you, Ace. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
So approved. Communications, we do not have any at this time. Next order of business, ladies and gentlemen, we have the public hearing and adoption of the 2020 current fund budget. Total amount, $28,289,709.05. We'll note for the record that the Township's Chief Municipal Finance Officer, Silvio Esposito, submitted the financial statement to the Division of Local Government Services, and it was received and approved on filing. Before we now proceed to have the public hearing, we are permitted to do a self-examination of the 2020 calendar year budget, which Mr. Esposito was able to do with the approval of the state. So we have a resolution of the Township Committee permitting the Township to assume the responsibility of conducting a self-examination of the calendar year 2020 current fund budget. May we have a motion to approve that resolution?
So moved by Francioli.
We have a motion by Mr. Francioli, and seconded by whom?
Ace Gallagher.
By Committeeman Gallagher. On roll call for approval of the resolution, Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Faramasca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill.
Yes.
And Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
So approved. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to unmute to conduct the public hearing.
Participants are unmuted.
So at this time, May we have a motion by the Township Committee to conduct the public hearing?
This is John making a motion to conduct a public meeting.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Faramasca to open the meeting to the public on the adoption of the budget. Do we have a second on that motion?
Yeah, Michael seconded it.
Okay, Mr. Mahalko on second. So on roll call to open the meeting to the public for public hearing on the budget. Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Faramasca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill.
Yes.
And Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
Okay, at this time, as I indicated before about how we're going to go in alphabetical order. So anyone whose name starts with A through G, if you wish to address the Township Committee on the budget, will you please identify yourself with your full name and address?
Terry Baird, 180 Parsippany Road in the Whippany section of Hanover.
Thank you, Terry. Please go ahead and state your question or make your comment.
I really just have a question in reference to the budget. In light of the potential financial mess that the nation will be facing, has the Township Committee thought of scaling back or revising the budget at all in order to be probably more in line as to what type of monies will be coming in? That's the end of my question.
Okay, we'll take your question once we go through the names of members of the public, and we will address that question. Anyone wishing to address the Township Committee on the budget whose name begins with H to N? Okay, hearing none. Anyone wishing to address the Township Committee on the budget whose last names begin with O through Z? Okay, hearing none, then we only have one question from Terry Baird. So we're going to have Mr. Esposito address that question.
At this time, there was no consideration to scale down the budget because during our budget workshop, everything that could have been cut out of the budget was to allow the township to run as need be. We have discussed that during the year, if certain fundings do not come in as we projected, we are not going to make major capital expenses to have an outlay of cash, and we can always do line item cancellations if we need to 6 months from now or later in the future.
Is there any member of the Township Committee wishing to address Ms. Baird's question?
Francioli. To further comment on the CFO's comment, we will be undertaking shortly recommendation of a financial risk assessment study. We will undertake that, and until that's completed, a recommendation, as the financial officer also stated, is that we will freeze on any non-essential spending. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Francioli. Any other members of the Township Committee wishing to address Ms. Baird's question? Okay, hearing none, we're just going to ask one more time if there is any member of the public wishing to address the Township Committee on the public hearing for the 2020 current fund budget. Okay, hearing none, then may we have a motion to close the public hearing on the 2020 current fund budget?
This is John. I make a motion to close the public hearing of the 2020 budget.
Do we have a second?
Ryan, I'll second that. Second.
We have a second by Mr. Cahill. Now, on adoption, be it resolved that the Township Committee's 2020 current fund budget in the amount of $28,289,700.
All participants are muted.
$709.05 is hereby approved and adopted. May we have a motion on the adoption of the budget?
So moved. So moved.
We have first motion by Mr. Cahill. By Ace, by Ace. and second by John Faramasca. On roll call for adoption of the 2020 local municipal budget, Mr. Gallagher,
Aye.
Mr. Faramasca,
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko,
Yes.
Mr. Cahill, Mr. Cahill,
Yes.
Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
So adopted unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to the public hearing and adoption of ordinances. The first ordinance is 12-2020, an ordinance of the Township Committee of the Township of Hanover, amending and supplementing ordinance number 1/2020 and section 125-4, entitled Recreation Department Fees, under Chapter 125 of the Code of the Township, entitled Fees, with the inclusion of new fees for various recreation and park administration programs and activities. And the second ordinance for public hearing, ordinance number 13-2020, an ordinance of the Township Committee of the Township of Hanover, authorizing the renewal of a lease agreement by and between the Township of Hanover and the Township's Board of Education for a 5-year period commencing on April 1st, 2020 and expiring on March 31st, 2025 for the use and maintenance of the athletic field by the Township on property owned by the Board of Education. And that is located at Lot 10.01 in Block 2301 as set forth on the tax map of the Township of Hanover. We'll state for the record that both ordinances and notices of introduction appeared in full in the March 18th, 2020 issue of the Daily Record in accordance with law. So at this time, we will convene the public hearings on both ordinances. We will now unmute,
All participants are unmuted.
and we'll ask at this time, again in alphabetical order, is there anyone wishing to make a comment or ask a question concerning ordinance number 12-2020 or ordinance number 13-2020 if your name begins with A through G? Hearing none, is there anyone wishing to ask a question whose names begin H to N? Again, hearing none, anyone wishing to address the Township Committee on both those ordinances whose last names begin with O through Z?
Yes, I have a comment. This is Derek Shearer from 291 Whippany Road in Whippany.
Sure.
I apologize if this is the incorrect format of this, but just so you guys are aware, whenever the host mutes or unmutes all the callers, it drops out all the information or all the audio for the call for like 3 to 5 seconds. And I just wanted to make you guys aware of that.
Okay, thank you, Derek. We'll take note of that. Okay, are there any comments from the public concerning any of those ordinances? Hearing none, may we have a motion to close on the consent agenda the public hearing and adoption of ordinances 12 and 13-2020?
So moved. Ace Gallagher.
That's Mr. Gallagher. And on second? Ron Francioli. Now, on roll call to close the public hearing. Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Faramasca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill.
Aye.
And Mr. Francioli. Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
Okay. And now, at this time, may we have a motion to adopt ordinance number 12-2020 and 13-2020? Motion for adoption.
I'll make the motion to adopt. Mike.
Mike Cahill, Mike Mahalko, thank you. Do we have a second?
Cahill, second.
Who is that?
Brian Cahill will second.
We have a second by Mr. Cahill. On roll call for adoption of ordinance 12-2020 and 13-2020. On roll call, Mr. Gallagher,
Aye.
Mr. Ferramaska,
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko,
Yes.
and Mr. Cahill,
Yes.
and Mr. Ferramaska. I'm sorry. And Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
Okay, we have all five. Both ordinances are adopted. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to proceed on the introduction of the following ordinances. We're going to read into the record the ordinance titles for 14, 15, and 16. On ordinance 17, we're going to take a separate vote, and I'm going to have an explanation, a little explanation on that ordinance for introduction. So the first three on introduction as a consent agenda, these three ordinances will appear in full in the April 15th issue of the Daily Record in accordance with law. And we are putting a footnote to the introduction of these three ordinances, that in the event the state of emergency continues at May 14th, the likelihood is that we may have another telephonic regular meeting. And if that is the case, we will post legal ads in the Daily Record, the Star Ledger, and the Hanover Eagle, and post same on the township's website. We need to take that action as a precaution in the event the governor continues the state of emergency on May 14th. But right now, the time established for the public hearing on ordinances 14, 15, and 16 is 8 o'clock, with the hope that the state of emergency will be lifted. If not, and we have to go telephonically again, then we will post written notice by legal ad in all three publications and on the website. So on ordinance 14-2020, it's an ordinance of the Township Committee amending section 166-138.2, fences and walls, in Article 19, general provisions of Chapter 166 of the Code of the Township, entitled Land Use and Development Legislation, in order to amend the regulations for fences and walls. Ordinance 15-2020. This ordinance would amend Section 166-113, yards, in Article 19, general provisions of Chapter 166 of the Code of the Township, entitled Land Use and Development Legislation, in order to amend the regulations for permitted yard encroachments. And ordinance number 16-2020 is an ordinance of the Township Committee authorizing the implementation of Phase 1 of a multi-phase project for the improvement and modernization of the Township's communications and technology infrastructure, and further appropriating the sum of $1,110,000 from the Township's 2020 Capital Improvement Fund and all prior years for the financing of the Phase 1 improvements. And this money is available in the Capital Improvement Fund as discussed and approved by the Township Committee during its February 1st budget work session. Once again, in accordance with law, the three ordinances will be published in full with the notices of introduction in the April 15th issue of the Daily Record. So at this time, may we have a motion for introduction?
So moved. John Fermaska.
Motion by Mr. Ferramaska.
Francioli, second.
Mr. Francioli on a second. So on roll call for introduction of ordinances 14, 15, and 16. Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher, on introduction.
Aye.
Mr. Ferramosca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill. Mr. Cahill.
Yes.
And Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
So introduced. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the next ordinance is an ordinance dealing with the Pine Plaza redevelopment plan. And the ordinance, this ordinance was discussed by the governing body during the closed legal session. And the ordinance will be modified to remove any citations dealing with Nico's Japanese Restaurant or one other residential property owned by Nico. So any reference to the Nico's Japanese Restaurant or other property owned by Nico's will be deleted from the ordinance in full. That ordinance will be published at a later date. The public hearing for this ordinance will be on June 11th at 8 p.m. We will be providing written notice to everyone surrounding the Pine Plaza development, proposed development. Written notice similar to what we did with the River Park redevelopment plan. And we're preparing the list of those people who will be notified in writing of the public hearing. And again, we're hopeful. Again, we're going to be putting a notice with the ordinance that while the ordinance is currently scheduled for public hearing for June 11th, in the event the state of emergency continues, we may have to move the public hearing to another date, because I am sure that we will have members of the public who want to turn out to be heard concerning this ordinance, and it might not be possible to have such a public hearing telephonically, because we know that there will be enough interest in this ordinance. So at this time, we're taking a separate vote on this ordinance, because we do have a member of the public hearing, a member of the public body that will recuse himself. So this is ordinance 17-2020. It's an ordinance of the Township Committee of the Township of Hanover adopting a redevelopment plan for the Pine Plaza development pursuant to NJSA 48:12A-7. And once again, I'm going to repeat for the record, all references to the lot and block numbers for Nico Japanese Restaurant and a single-family home owned by Nico Japanese Restaurant will be removed from the ordinance when it is published in the Daily Record. So at this time, may we have a motion to introduce ordinance 17-2020?
So moved, John Ferramosca.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Brian Cahill.
We have a second by Mr. Gallagher. Now, on roll call for introduction of ordinance number 17-2020, which will be amended, as I indicated, to remove any reference to Nico's Japanese Restaurant or a single-family home owned by Nico's. On roll call for introduction, Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Ferramosca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill.
Aye.
And Mr. Francioli.
Recluse.
Mr. Francioli is recusing himself from voting on ordinance number 17-2020, and we will so note that for the record. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we now continue with the resolutions as a consent agenda. We have one additional resolution which is added, and for the benefit of members of the public, I'm going to read each title of the resolutions into the record. We will be taking the resolution dealing with the sale of property related to the Pine Plaza development as a separate vote, again because Mr. Francioli will be recusing himself. So we do have one additional resolution which is added, which I will read that into the record as well. So the resolutions as a consent agenda are as follows. Providing for the advancement in grade and compensation for Patrolman Emmanuel Malasic, a member of the Police Department, having received a satisfactory job performance evaluation. Appointing Daniel E. Aquero as a new probationary patrolman for a one-year period commencing Friday, May 1st, 2020 through Saturday, May 1st, 2021 at a base salary of $58,970 at Step 1 of the salary guide set forth in Ordinance Number 18-2019. This is a conditional offer of employment subject to receiving satisfactory medical and psychological examinations, a negative drug test, and receiving a comprehensive background investigation. The next resolution, appointing Catherine M. Valentin as a replacement civilian police dispatcher in the police department for a 6-month probationary period commencing Friday, May 1st, 2020 and ending on Sunday, November 1st, 2020, and establishing her compensation at $24.04 per hour, or if annualized, $50,000 under Job Group 6 in accordance with Salary Range Guide D of Salary Ordinance 17-2019. This too is a conditional offer of employment subject to receiving a satisfactory medical examination, negative drug test, and negative criminal history record check. Next resolution, endorsing the submission of a Morris County Historic Preservation Trust Fund 2020 construction grant application in the amount of $26,495.50 for the purpose of preserving headstones and the central lane at the Township's historic burying yard, and further pledging $5,500 as a cash match. Authorizing the award of an extraordinary unspecifiable services agreement with Joanna Pietrusky and the firm of Aegis Restoro, LLC, in an amount not to exceed $8,500 for the purpose of repairing, restoring, and preserving 9 gravestone markers at the Township's historic Whippany Burying Yard, subject to the receipt of a 2020 Morris County Historic Preservation Trust Fund grant, plus a $5,500 cash match. The next resolution, approving the restoration of the Whippany Burying Yard Central Lane in an amount not to exceed $16,155.50 as part of the Phase 10 Gravestone Restoration Project, and authorizing the business administrator to issue a purchase order to John Caruso Builders, LLC, to perform the restoration, all in accordance with NJSA 40A:11-6.1, which restoration is subject to the receipt of a 2020 Morris County Historic Preservation Trust Fund grant plus a township cash match of $5,500. Next is a resolution authorizing the execution of amended settlement agreements with Fair Share Housing Center, River Park Business Center, and 25-35 Airport Road and 45 Airport Road, LLC, eliminating overlay zoning for Block 8503, Lots 3, 4, and 7, and Block 8305, Lot 6, and 7.01 and 8 on Parsippany Road. We're going to skip the resolution dealing with the sale of certain land, dealing with the Pine Plaza development. We'll come back to that for a separate vote. Next resolution authorizing the refund of redemption monies to an outside lien holder for 17 Hilltop Circle. Then approving the refund of tax overpayments. And the last item, which is a late resolution, is a resolution of the Township Committee retaining the services of Bruce Brucey Jr. in an amount not to exceed $26,500 for the demolition of a residential structure located at 70 Whippany Road and also designated as Lot 2.01 in Block 4301, which property is under contract between the Township and Our Lady of Mercy Roman Catholic Church. That property, once acquired by the Township, will be designated for use of a group home, which is much needed in the Township. So at this time, are there any questions from members of the Township Committee concerning any resolutions to be taken as a consent agenda?
Joe, this is Fred Samaro.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Samaro.
Mr. Giorgio, for Resolution G, which is the amended settlement agreements,
Yes, sir.
could I propose that it be amended to also read that the agreements are subject to final legal and administrator review? We want to make sure provisions related to the state of emergency and things like that are included in the contract based on executive session discussions. So I would ask for that provision, that we'd be subject to those amendments.
Yes, with that amendment, are there any questions from any members of the Township Committee before we take a roll call? Okay, hearing none,
Motion to move.
we have a motion to move by Mr. Ferramaska.
Second, Jason Elder.
We have a second by Mr. Gallagher. And on those resolutions, again, with the amendment asked, requested by Mr. Samrau, this is going to be resolutions A, B, C, D, E, F, G, as amended with the language added by Mr. Samrau, I, J, and K. We have a motion and a second. On roll call for approval, Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Ferramaska.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill.
Aye.
And Mr. Francioli. Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
So approved. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going back to Resolution H, which is authorizing the sale of certain land and property no longer needed for public use by the Township. This has to do with property that is located at the cul-de-sac at Mount Pleasant Avenue. We have a minimum asking price on this property, which will be sold at public sale. The minimum asking price is $85,000. And anyone can bid on this property, although we realize that this property is needed for the Pine Plaza development. It is a public bid, and anyone can bid on that. Do you have anything to add on that, Mr. Samrow?
Just that this is based on the fact that the township has a property interest, one that may just be by way of a right-of-way, but it was independently appraised. So that's the reason for the minimum bid, so that if anyone wants to bid on the property, the township will receive fair market value for that.
Thank you, Mr. Samrow. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to ask for a motion for approval on this resolution authorizing the sale of certain land and property no longer needed for public use by the Township of Hanover. May we have a motion?
So moved, John Mosca.
May we have a second?
Second, Mike Cahill.
Second by Mr. Cahill. On roll call for approval, Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Faramasca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill.
Yes.
Mr. Francioli.
Recused.
Mr. Francioli is recusing on Resolution H, and we have so noted that in the record. And also on Resolution G, also we have to do a separate. Yes, and we'll note for the record, Mr. Francioli, you're recusing yourself on item G on the resolution dealing with OLM?
No, I have no issue on OLM.
Hold on 1 minute. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Just for Mr. Francioli, are you going to recuse yourself also on item G dealing with River Park and also Pine Plaza?
If that is included in the agreements of fair share, yes.
Yes, so we'll I think what we should do, Mr. Samrow, is take a revote on G.
Okay. Sounds like a good idea.
Okay, just so for the record then, Mr. Francioli is recusing himself. So this is authorizing the execution of amended settlement agreements with Fair Share Housing Center, River Park Business Center, 25 to 35 Airport Road, 45 Airport Road, and eliminating the overlay zoning for Block 8503, Lots 3, 4, and 7, and Block 8305, Lots 6, 701, and 8 on Parsippany Road, and to add the amendment that you added, Mr. Samrow, on the emergency provisions dealing with the approvals. So we're going to redo that vote on G so Mr. Francioli can recuse himself. May we have a motion for approval? So moved by Mr. Faramasca. Who did the second? Mr. Gallagher, second. Once again on roll call for approval of item G. Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Faramasca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill.
Yes.
And Mr. Francioli
Recuse.
recusing on item G. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for your patience. Next, last item on the formal agenda for the administrator clerk is the payment of bills, $7,092,994.60. May we have a motion on the approval of the payment of
Francioli.
Mr. Francioli? Do we have a second?
Second, Mahalko.
Mr. Mahalko on second on the payment of bills. On roll call, Mr. Gallagher.
Aye.
Mr. Faramasca.
Aye.
Mr. Mahalko.
Yes.
Mr. Cahill. Mr. Cahill.
Yes.
Mr. Francioli.
Aye.
So approved on the payment of bills. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we're now at the point where we can open the meeting to the public for any comments or questions. Once again, we're going to go in alphabetical order. So anyone wishing to be heard by the Township Committee on any name A through G, may you state your name and address for the record if you have a question or comment.
Terry Baird, 180 Parsippany Road, with Finney section of Hanover.
Go right ahead, Miss Baird. Terry, go right ahead and state your question or make your comment.
Again, okay. First, I wanted to thank Mr. Semrau for his hard work with the overlay zone. I appreciate that very much. I also would like to thank yourself, Joe, for this new territory that you are endeavoring in after all these years.
Thank you, Terry.
And my final is a comment in reference to the ordinance introduction 17-2020. I don't know how it happens, how Nico's lot and blocks get included, but these lot and block numbers seem to be bantered about, and it's rather concerning because I am cautious when looking towards the future, because previously there were other lot and blocks included in that Mount Pleasant area, specifically lots 15 and 17, that had come up in previous titles of introductions of things in the past. And I'm concerned about the houses at the end of Mount Pleasant getting swallowed up with this cul-de-sac thing. I don't know if anybody has anything that they can say about it, but every time these lot and blocks come up on any of these ordinances, I very carefully comb through them to make sure to see what they are, because it seems that they are, I don't know, it just doesn't, sometimes things just don't set right, that's all I can say. But I appreciate all your hard work, and thank you very much for still continuing with our government and all the things that are happening in today's society. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Anyone whose last name begins H2N wishing to comment? Anyone whose last name begins with O through Z? Any public comment?
Yes. Hello. This is Freeholder Stephen Shaw.
How are you, Freeholder?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I actually been listening in for about a half an hour, and I just wanted to, I realized with everybody going to virtual meetings, it gives me the ability to check in on a lot of different municipal meetings without having to drive all over Morris County. So that's one little benefit. So I just wanted to, on behalf of the Freeholder Board, extend my thanks to all of you, as one of your residents just pointed out, for dealing with these extraordinary circumstances and making sure local government carries on, because that's really where the rubber meets the road. So I want to thank you for that. And I was glad to see on the resolution list, because I knew there was a little hiccup with the Lady of Mercy property there and something with the county planning, and I had talked to John Ferramosa about that, and that got straightened out. So glad to see that. And I also just want to reiterate that the county government is up and operating, albeit in a much different way, just as you are all doing in your municipality. But we're carrying on the essential services of county government. The testing site actually closed early today because of the wind. We'll be back open tomorrow. And if you had any questions particular to the county, I could try to answer them. I know this isn't really a question-answer period, but just wanted to extend my thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Freeholder, for joining us. This has been a new experience for all of us. So we thank you for joining us, because we've never had a freeholder come to a regular meeting of the Township Committee. They've been here for the reorganization meetings, but for a regular meeting, we really appreciate your interest and concern. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I could do it. I actually, I live in Mountain Lakes, and I popped in on that meeting because there was an issue I wanted to talk about in my town, just as a resident. And then it dawned on me, and I've been going around to quite a few of the municipalities. You're right, because on reorg night, it's very busy, and you're trying to get to several places in one evening. And this was nice just to hear you carry on your regular business, and you had a lot of business on the agenda that
We sure did, Steve. Thank you very much again on behalf of the Township Committee.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Good night. Okay, as we continue, we have the report from Mr. Samrow on the Township's affordable housing obligation.
Thank you, Mr. Giorgio. I'll be brief. There was on the agenda tonight a resolution which authorized a revised estimate of fair share housing along with River Park Business Center and a small adjustment to Airport Road. But this is a product of the hard work of the Mayor and Township Committee, listening to residents' concerns, going back, meeting with residents, meeting with property owners, meeting with the special master, and then doing something that I have not seen done. They actually had the ability to negotiate, and they did this over months of a period of time to make sure it was equitable and fair and in the best interest of the township with other parties. And what's happened here tonight is the overlay zones, as mentioned previously, they've been eliminated on Parsippany Road. And they've adjusted because, generally speaking, they'll be adjusted to already existing sites at River Park and Airport Road, and they're not as the potential of development isn't as significant as the primary River Park and Airport Road development, because this will be the final phase of River Park. Like any project, if and when it reaches that stage, and one half of the River Park addendum relates to property which is presently, it's wet, it's a pond, and the expectation or hope, like any landowner is, that it'll be drained and it'll dry up and it'll be suitable for development. If it is not suitable for development, those units, there's 250 that would be in the pond area, cannot be reallocated or developed somewhere else. So I really have to say the Township Committee spent countless hours at meetings and then outside of meetings in discussions with residents, discussions with the special master and other landowners to search for the best location and best way to weigh all the factors and make this decision. So that's the update with respect to affordable housing. There will be no overlay zone on Parsippany Road. There will be some expansion at River Park and a minor expansion potentially at Airport Road. Thank you, Mr. Giorgio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samrow, for a very concise report to the Township Committee and the public. Item number 13, other business. Are there any comments from members of the Township Committee at this time?
Mr. Moderator, if we want to go in order, we can do that. Committeeman Gallagher.
Ace, do you have any comments? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Faramasca? Mr. Mayor, I don't think we have any comments from members of the Township Committee.
Then I'd like to comment on this before we adjourn, and then give the floor back for one last moment in case there are any comments. But we certainly want to wish everyone, even though we're on this close call, Easter week, Holy Week, all the blessings of Holy Week as it comes up through this most difficult time of crisis that we're going through. I want to also make a comment of assurances to our community. A big thank you to our community. and we're not through it yet, but we're winning the battle. And at the helm with Kathy Whitehead from our Board of Health, Carlos Perez, Dr. Perez, Tom Quirk, and certainly Chief Ryan, who are steering the ship at this point through some very difficult times. But I pray we're out of this soon so we can open our parks and open our businesses and get back to the normalcy of Hanover Township again. And so on that note, are there any other committeemen on the line?
Yeah, this is Mike. I'd like to make a real quick statement, if you don't mind.
Mike, go ahead.
Okay. Two things. First, so obviously we got a lot of cancellations. That's obvious. But looking ahead, we are going to do our best to keep things open and get to normalcy as soon as possible. So far, our parade is still on track to go. So I want to make that clear. I know some other towns have canceled their Memorial Day parades. We have not canceled ours. It is still scheduled to go off. And secondly, for this weekend, Derek Shear, if you're still listening, I want to thank you and the other Whippany firemen and Cedar Knolls firemen. The Easter Bunny is going to be driven around on the fire trucks on Saturday beginning at 10 a.m. and circulating throughout the town. And just driving around waving to the kids. I've gotten many emails of addresses for them to go to. But if there's anybody that's listening that would like someone to, like the truck to drive by, just shoot me your address and we'll have the truck drive by. No, we are not making appointments, so you'll have to keep an ear and an eye out for them. But the trucks usually have their sirens going, and you usually hear them coming before they get there. And my email is mmahalco@hanovertownship.com, and just email me your address. Other than that, everyone else, please be safe, be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else wishing to comment?
Mike, that's great news. Business as normal as best we can do it under the circumstances. Accolades to the Recreation Department, the fire company, and you. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We're trying to do our best. And thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for putting this all together.
Thank you, Mike.
And short. And Krista, absolutely. You guys did a great job.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, this is John. I think Committeeman Gallagher has a comment as well.
Can you hear me, John?
Yes, go right ahead.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. First of all, I want to thank everybody in our Hanover Township municipal family for all the work, all the stress. Joe, I can't say enough about the work you guys are doing today, so thank you. Great people, and thank you. But I just also want to thank our residents because in Hanover Township we put together an initiative with family and friends called People Helping People. And right now we have about 70 people that are volunteered. Not only do they shopping for people and checking in on people, but we have donations coming in. And they're going through the Abundant Life Church, and then they're going from there to anyone that needs them, and then from there to the Interfaith Food Pantry. So there's a lot of really great things. We even had a resident go help a woman find her glasses, and then take her to the bank, and then food shopping. So everything's going pretty good. Everybody's coming together, and I just want to say, look, you're part of this family. God bless everybody, and enjoy your holidays. That's it.
Thank you.
John, you on?
That's John. I want to wish everybody a very happy Easter and wish all the best during this most difficult time. Please be safe. Please be well.
Thank you. You as
Thank
well.
you.
Brian?
Yeah, no, I'll just reiterate what everybody else said. Thank you very much, not only to our first responders, but you folks in town as well, trying to keep things as normal as you possibly can in these crazy times. And I also put out a thank you to everybody else that in the private sector that is out there and they have to work just to be able to serve the public. They're putting themselves at risk as well. So really thank you to everybody. And Dace's point, the town is really coming together as I was sure they would. There was never any doubt. This is a great town in times of crisis. I really think that we're going to just continue to come together as this thing progresses. So with that said, thank you. Have a wonderful holiday as best you can, and thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Motion to adjourn?
Moderator, back to you.
Okay, Thank you, Mayor. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved. Councilor Mosca.
Second.
We have a second. We have a motion by Mr. Ferramasca, seconded by Mr. Gallagher. All in favor?
Aye.
Hey, the meeting is adjourned. Happy Easter.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Easter.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Well done, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Good job.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.